Well, and so then what prevents us from great partnership and great relationships? Generally, what we were taught about relationships and partnerships and who to be is what prevents us from great relationships and great partnership. Ultimately, relationships are the greatest invitation to healing, to expansion, to personal growth, if we see them as the vehicle of that.
You're listening to the Everyday Legends podcast, the show that is dedicated to helping everyday men build legendary relationships with yourself, your partner, and your world. I'm your host, Mike Campbell, and the aim of this podcast is simple: to help you navigate life with more clarity, more confidence, and purpose-driven action, with plenty of stories, a load of lessons, and some loving straight talk. So let's get started. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Everyday Legends with your host. That's me, Mike Campbell, and I'm very excited today to bring you my guest, our first repeat guest, Mr. Mark Groves. That is the man behind Create the Love, human connection specialist, the man who delivers just repeat after repeat after repeat bomb of no bullshit relationship advice. A good friend of mine, someone I consider to be a brother, really, and extremely fortunate to have on the show again. I mean, I could have like every episode conversation with Mark, to be honest, but there's other great people out there. So anyway, we brought Mark back on today, and really what I wanted to explore with him was, I talk about partnership, being a partner, and, I have the program, A Better Partner Project, which, by the way, is open for a limited time. If you're listening to this right now, jump over to the site. The Better Partner Project is open. A 4-week accelerator course in relationships for men. Learning how to be your best, how to get on the same page and create true, secure, fun, easy partnerships. All the support, all the lectures, all the workbooks, all the stuff you need. So I talk about this stuff. And so I wanted to bring Mark on and actually talk about, what is being a great partner? What isn't? Why do we not? What gets in the way of that? And so you'll see as we wander through this conversation, we will explore that. Not necessarily super explicitly. This is how to be a better partner so much, but everything that we explore in this that Mark brings to the conversation. We do talk about secure attachment, but we share some of our own stories, and Mark shares some of his own. An engagement now 16 years ago, which feels like another world ago. And so you pay attention as we wander through this conversation, gentlemen. You will get many ideas, many clues, many takeaway pieces of advice and actions, pragmatic actions to go and apply on how you can be a better partner, but more so on how you can create relationships in your life. Be it if you're in one now, or there's one on the horizon, or you want like fucking mad for there one to be one on the horizon. There is a lot in here for you to take away, to learn about yourself and how you might be showing up, how you might have been showing up, how you can be your best, how you can step into a relationship. We speak about this idea of harmony. Often what we've done in relationships is create disharmony within ourselves to create the illusion of harmony in the relationship. But there can't be a harmony in the relationship, as Mark says it externally, if one or both of us have disharmony within ourselves. So we explore a bunch of that stuff. It's really cool. Mark's just so wonderful. His way of bringing the science and the holy shit depth of understanding relationships and the nuance to us, the everyday man, is beautiful. I admire him for it. I am inspired by it, and I take so much from it personally. I hope you get a lot from this episode. Let us know what you're learning from it. Let us know any questions you have. Let us know what you're going to apply in your life. And again, as a reminder, make sure to go jump on the opportunity whilst the Better Partner Project is open and dive into this work with me and many other men who've explored this in the past and are exploring it now. As always, a thank you for the 5-star ratings and reviews you leave me. And if you haven't left one yet, hey, here's an invitation. Do us a solid, jump over and leave us a review, click download, see first, all that kind of stuff. Otherwise, here's the episode with the wonderful, the only, there's probably more, but you know what I mean. The fucking legend himself, Mark Groves. Brother, welcome back to the show, my first repeat.
Sweet, I'm excited to be the first repeat. Usually it should be better than the first time if we take all virginities into account.
That feels like that's a rabbit hole we could explore, and no pressure. Okay, so what I want to explore today, you're a human connection specialist, and I've learned so much from you over the years in your teachings and your content and your expertise, and as a friend, as a man, and witnessing you in your relationships as well. And I talk a lot about, and I did some content recently on like being a great partner and what that is. So I kind of want to explore that subject a little bit. And, one of the things that I see instantly is we have often this expectation that we take on board of who we think we need to be, who the world perhaps thinks we should be, maybe who we think a partner wants us to be. So where I want to kind of go first of all is, what do you actually think prevents us from being a great partner? And if I pull that term back, what prevents us being, kind of the partner that we can be in a relationship?
What prevents us? I mean, I think there's a couple interesting intersections there. One is that, we are socialized. If are we speaking in the context of men or just in general?
Yeah, let's go in general, and then we can specify if we need to.
Well, I think regardless of gender, we're socialized however we identify to be a certain way.
Yeah.
And because of that, we're sort of under the constructs of that, the parameters or the rules of engagement of what sort of behaviors are normal or not normal, what role should I take in a relationship, which ones are sort of not accessible or not celebrated or maybe even shamed. And then you have what we are told the world wants more of us, wants some more skills, more emotionality, and more speaking more in the context of men in that one. And then you have what people actually choose, which is often in conflict with what they say they want. So, you might hear people say they want really emotionally intelligent, challenging partner, but then when they face one, they don't know what to do with it, and it makes them very uncomfortable. And so this whole idea that, let's add to that, Disney lied to everybody. And so even this misconception that a partner is just going to get me and it's all just going to be easy once I figure out I choose the right person. And certainly choosing a good person is a very important component to relationship. I think it's a dangerous idea to think that once you choose the right person, then everything's easy. It might be easier with a good person, but it certainly depends how you define easy too. Because
that's relative to past experiences, maybe.
Right.
Yeah, or what you witnessed in your parents.
Yeah, like if easy is your partner doesn't share their opinion ever and tell you how you can grow. I mean, some might define that as a great relationship.
Yeah.
And so we also have the evolving definition of what we want from relationship, which I think our generations want more from relationship, and they certainly can create more from relationship. And so I think that's a big challenge that we face compared to what we've been socialized to want and pursue.
Yeah. So there's a lot more, at the very least, curiosity and questioning around our relationships, how we're inherent into them, and kind of what is possible for us. But then there was this thing that you said there, which was, like, regardless of all the other stuff, it might be easy, choosing the right partner. And it tends to have that weighting on one of the key things for our relationship is who I choose, which on some level disregards who I'm choosing to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So where does that part come in? How do we turn that mirror back on ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, the common denominator in all our relationships and our relationship outcomes is us. And so when we sort of look at the fault of our partner and the fault of whatever the world And we're like, it's their fault that I can't create this relationship, but blah, blah, blah. I think so often we'll be like, oh, I'm attracted to these kinds of people. And it's like, well, why are you a good match to those kinds of people? Like, what is it in the way you relate? Because if we're taking, like when my partner and I broke up for a period of time, I was never concerned that I'd not be able to create an amazing relationship with someone else. I wasn't attached to her having to be my partner because I knew that if I found someone who wanted to create a deeply connected, growth-focused relationship, I just had to find someone who was interested in that. And then the two of us could communicate and create that thing because, it's not sort of luck that creates it. It's, what is it, that saying that luck is when preparation meets opportunity. And I think that's very applicable to relationship because we were just joking before we hit record of like, I just got engaged and you were like, well, how did it feel? I'm like, very different than the first time I got engaged, because I'm such a different person and what I want from a relationship is very different. What I'm willing to bring is very different. My self-awareness is very different. So,
Yeah. And okay, let's explore that. As you said, that was 16 years difference. I mean, fuck, that's a long time. Holy shit.
Some people get engaged.
Some people get married at 16. Yeah. So, okay, what for you coming in, like, what did you bring and why were you bringing it with that first engagement?
Well, the first engagement I was bringing what I was taught to bring, be a good provider, although I was 27. So I was a good provider at 27. I was caring, I was considerate, but I didn't have a lot of emotional depth. I wasn't really very aware of my wounding and how my fear of being hurt was holding me back from actually being seen. So, when I look back, I'm like, I never really even let my ex-fiance love me. I never really let her close. And today, that's ultimately the wounds that only took 16 years to navigate. Really, it's been a beautiful process of growth. And a lot of people do this within one relationship. I just happen to do it within the container of my own singledom and also a few other partners. So, very different mindset now. What I want from a relationship is very different. I remember when that engagement ended, I was like, how the fuck did I get here? Like, why did I get engaged when I didn't want to? So that shows you. And then
so why did you get engaged, do you think?
It was the next logical step. It was what you were supposed to do. I don't think this is specific to Catholicism, but in my Catholic school upbringing, it was like get married by 27, have kids by 30. And I was right on track. I got engaged at 27. So giddy up.
Yeah. So you clearly cared for this person, but there was a bit of that. This is what I'm supposed to do. Back to that expectation thing. Right.
Yeah. What I was taught, the story that I was taught to have my life unfold as. And so that prevents us from actually letting the life that we want, that is authentic to us, to actually unfold. The expectations of being in the story that everyone else is in, because then it justifies everyone else's story and your own. So it's this cyclical, symbiotic relationship that keeps generations going and systems going. And when you get into it, it's kind of all correlated to all systems.
Okay. How deep should we get into that system?
All right.
But I hear that because I hear that in my own, like that line you said, the next logical step, right? Like removing everything else, it doesn't have much romance to it, does it?
No, it doesn't, does it?
You might have done it in a romantic setting and you got on the one knee, but if the reason behind it is the logical next step, that doesn't really connect to intention. Not a kind of grounded, chosen, purposeful, conscious love and creating something that is growing as a third body, as Francis Vella says in terms of a relationship. Yeah,
it's so different. Yes, and you think about, when I got out of that engagement and I started to explore why do some relationships last and others not? Why do we do things we don't want to do? Why do we spend money on these things? And I thought to myself, like, well, because all of a sudden I'd gotten out of the story and I'd now chosen to sort of in the way that society views someone whose relationship ends is that they're a failure. So I was willing to take on being a failure, to choose myself. And so that means now I was able to observe where people were not, because I was them. And I started to look around my life and I started to see how many people were living so asleep, were choosing, just allowing their lives to continue to not be authentic expressions of who they are. And, sort of getting into how the systems overlay over that. It's like, well, if you're not living as your authentic self and there's a certain pain of that disassociation and disconnection, you're going to numb it and treat it with materialism and alcohol and drugs and pharmaceuticals. And ironically, I was a pharmaceutical rep. So let's just add that to the mix of add that to the system. Shit.
Yeah. And so what I'm getting in there, like back to the question, what prevents us being a great partner, being, who we really can be in our relationships for ourselves and for the other, lots of things, but one being that kind of disconnection. Well, I won't even allow myself to actually live fully my experience. And so there's going to be a gap there, and I got to fill that gap with something. Otherwise I have to face it. And I don't really want to face that, right? That's my integrity. That's, so much speaking back to me. And so I might fill that with any number of things.
Well, and so then what prevents us from great partnership and great relationships? Generally, what we were taught about relationships and partnerships and who to be is what prevents us from great relationships and great partnership. Ultimately, relationships are the greatest invitation to healing, to expansion, to personal growth, if we see them as the vehicle of that. But we often don't. We're sort of taught to just sort of tolerate them, which is really weird, that you just are like, we call our partner the ball and chain, like as if in some way they're inhibiting me from my freedom and my expansion. They're holding me back. If your relationship is where you go to become less of who you are, that's not a good thing. But that, when it's what most people are doing, wanting more than that feels like you're being selfish or not realistic, which it's been so normalized that just desiring more from partnership is this act of rebellion at first. It's fucked up. When you think about it, it makes just simple logic. You're like, wait, that doesn't make sense. Why wouldn't we want to become more of who we are? But relationships their origin is not for personal expansion. Their origin is for survival.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking to maybe a lot of what you've just covered and a lot of people's real experiences, that's on some level still playing out, because then there's this security, like, right, of course we want to feel secure in our relationships, and maybe that's something we can talk about later. But if I need that to feel secure and I belong and I have a place and I have worth and I am lovable, then there's an imbalance there. We might both be doing it, but I'm taking, right? And if we're both taking, we're not creating and putting something into the relationship. So there is a survival mechanism going on there, right? And then there's this other thing that you mentioned that I want to explore, which is, you said with your previous fucking lifetime ago engagement breakup, which was you realized that you hadn't really let her love you. So why the fuck would we do that?
When I looked back, because that was a question that I faced at 35, and I was 27 when I got engaged. And it was like, have you ever actually let someone love you? And I was like, yeah, of course I have. But then I sort of,
it feels like an easy yes at the surface.
But I've been in relationships, so I must have.
Of course, what? I was engaged, idiot.
Right, exactly. But I started to look back and I'm like, when was the last time I actually chose someone available and didn't run from someone who truly cared about me, who truly could love me? And my fiance could have loved me, my ex-fiance, but I ran from her. And I started to look and I'm like, oh my God, I hadn't let anyone love me since I was 19. And when I was 19, I got, I experienced pretty giant betrayal in relationship, betrayal of myself, but betrayal by another. And in that just deep hurt of being betrayed and and just the grief of that I never really fully allowed myself to process. It was too much. It was so much. It was, a pretty deep, dark space of my life for 3 or 4 months that I could not be in it. And then I just sort of numbed my way out of it from there. I never really explored it. I never really expressed the anger and the rage. And I started to see that I hadn't let anyone love me at that point, at 34 or whatever, whenever I got asked that question. It had been 15 years. And that was really the true journey of being like, oh, I've been doing this relationship thing. I haven't been learning about it on a massive level, but I missed this huge aspect of it.
So because I see this kind of behavior. You said a few things in there. So what would that look like? If someone's like, yeah, of course I have. I've been in relationships my whole life. I'm always in relationships. If we were to connect and go, oh, maybe I haven't, or what would it actually look like for me to be able to go, oh, yes, I do let myself be loved, or maybe I'm blocking that?
Yeah, I mean, it would show up in sabotaging relationships. So it'd be like cheating, lying, leaving. As soon as someone tells you they care about you, you run. You date people who are newly out of relationships or still healing from them, which is not to say that you won't be healing when you're in relationship, but that they're like actively still trying to get over someone.
And so is that because then in part the focus can be on them and their healing, and maybe I can help fix them as well, which deflects any attention from me and letting someone in?
Yeah, exactly. It sort of validates my worth because I'm able to support them. They're the project. I'm the one supporting the project. Then I don't have to look at my own grief, my own vulnerability, my own work. It's codependencies, sort of in a nutshell. Yeah. And your obsession is other, or you're interested in people who will just never choose you. I mean, that's pretty obvious. Or you're into people who are married. That's, I hear people all the time where they're like, I keep attracting married people. And you're like, yeah, that's like, you'll never be fully chosen by them. Often I sort of look like, where in your life have you felt split before, where someone's trying to choose between you and something? People who come from split families sometimes can have that sort of recreation. And then how do you know you're actually doing it? Gosh, when you meet someone who really cares about you and pursues you, and you pursue them back. I mean, where there's like a mutuality to it, which human relationships are not. I mean, they're complex in that perspective, in that like we tend to be in relationship or attracted to people who sort of wound us in a similar way that we're used to. So, one of my sort of core childhood wounds was people don't choose me. Well, of course, I ended up in basically every relational pattern was that I didn't feel fully chosen. And then I felt sort of like I was the victim of my relational circumstances. Yet there were people beside the people I was fighting for choice from who were like, I'd choose you. And I'm like, yeah, we don't want to do that. That would be too complex. I'd have to surrender and actually believe I'm worthy of being loved. That would have been that would have been easy.
Yeah, complex.
Very vulnerable.
Complex purely because it's challenging my story that I have right here.
Exactly. Wait, I'm going to have to reorchestrate my whole psyche, in order to, even though, I mean, it would be the simplest way to heal everything. Because, you think about it, if someone had told me they loved me and I didn't believe I was lovable, then I can't receive it. I might not believe them. And I found that to be my experience for a long time, that I sort of hid in the dance of pursuit.
Yeah, and then you said something, like other focused, right? Like it would be easy for me to then, with the idea of like letting someone in, I place the responsibility on them. Can I trust them? It's easy for me to look at what their behavior is and maybe others, as opposed to like, can I be trusting? Can I let go? Can I let someone in? Can I share? This is where my heart's at. This is what I want. So then I want to ask you a question. This has popped up as well. One of my coaching guys asked this. And so I suppose it seems relevant here. What about in a different situation where I'm saying, hey, I want in. here's my heart. This is what I want. I would like a relationship with you. And they're like, I really like you. It feels like it's moving too fast. They can't seem to quite, not necessarily sabotage, but they just are like, maybe it's a bit too fast for me. I don't know if I can lean into that. Like, how do we approach that situation when I actually flip the other way? Not necessarily flip, but I'm operating from a different place of, hey, I dig you, I want in, and I'm not feeling met.
Yeah, I mean, when you're secure, that declaration of what you actually want, will either bring the person closer to alignment with what your intention for a relationship is, or they won't want it and they won't align. And if you're still wounded, you'll pursue them regardless of their answer, or you'll pivot or change what you want to match what they want, which is really just more forms of self-betrayal.
Yeah.
So in that context, if someone said, I feel like this is moving a little fast, I'm not really sure, I might say, okay, well, what pace is good for you? And are we moving towards the same thing?
Mm.
Because like, if our pace slows down, which some people can be too speedy, let's be honest. You've got two people who have two different relational experiences and trying to align their story to get to the same speed of momentum can be hard, because one person can be more ready for a relationship than another. And so sometimes for someone to slow down is actually their growth. And for another person, it might be to just speed up a little bit. That is their growth. Both people are on their edges. The thing is you don't want to change your momentum or your speed in a way that causes you to feel like you're abandoning your story and your desires. So if this person said, well, I really, if we slowed it down and just let's not take it anywhere serious right now. And I'm like, okay, cool. Just so I have clarity, do you mean like in the long run, what are you looking for? And you have to honor that, a lot of times people will try to dance in that gray language, so they never have to give you an answer, so they can keep getting the booty on the way. It's a story as old as time.
Or keep testing the waters to create a sense of safety and security. If I float in the gray for a while and we fluff around for a while, that will allow me to make a decision.
Yeah.
Which is like using someone, let's call it what it is.
Right. And when I think
can you float in the gray space with me long enough so then I can make a decision for us?
Naked? Can you float naked in the gray space for just long enough? When you think about it, there's not a single time I said I wasn't sure or wasn't ready, that, at least in my own experience, but I know there will be exceptions to this, where that slowing down was really what I was looking for, as opposed to I just wasn't ready for a relationship and I didn't want what they wanted. And you could be truthful, like, I'm not looking for anything serious right now. And the other person's like, neither am I. And they're not telling the truth.
Yeah, tell me what you want and I'll make sure I do or be that, so that we can be together. Exactly,
which is more chameleoning to keep connection. Like, all of this is about the exact same thing. Can you hold on to who you are and be in a connection? Can you not make connection to another person or being in a relationship with them more important than you being in a relationship with yourself? And that's the key. If you can hold on to, if you can learn how to not betray self for other, but stand in self with other, that's really where the growth is.
Yeah, and that's something that I my own personal experience is similar, right? Like, not bending and molding, and like a story of my own. I've shared this before, and we've shared similar stories, right? An engagement that broke up wasn't 16 years ago, but fuck, it's getting there now. What was it? It's like 13, I think. Right?
13.
Yeah. And I remember one day we were driving. It was a road trip, and we were engaged at this point in time. We were talking about our the future. We were talking about the future, which, spoiler alert, didn't happen. And and because we were planning our wedding at this point, so we were talking about the wedding, like where would it happen. She was religious, and it was quite important to her, and so that there was that, and then, like, if we had kids, when we have kids, like, what would they be baptized, and would they go to this school, and so on. And so, like, I suppose, like, the facetious side of me was like arguing against that. And I say facetious because there was probably, like a little bit of charge to it versus standing in my truth and saying, well, I don't agree with this. It was definitely that as well. Like I remember talking about the idea of saying vows to a priest, basically. And I was like, the thing that I want you to understand is that has no meaning for me. And because I don't respect the institution, that will be out of integrity for me. And so it won't have meaning. The words that I want to say to you. So I was saying that, but all the while in the back of my mind, there was this little thing running that essentially said, but at the end of the day, I'll just do all the yeses for her, because then we can just like have harmony and peace and be fine. Like I was telling myself in the moment of it that I will abandon what I believe in my integrity so that we can be together and it's okay.
Yeah, isn't that so interesting? This idea that external harmony is actually harmony when it's at the cost of the internal harmony. So like you're going to be in dysregulation and disharmony, I think that's word, in order to maintain the misconception of harmony in the external, because that's not actually harmony, because harmony would have both internal and external harmony. It would be in peace in both. The choice outside of you would be peaceful as the choice inside of you. And so you think about that, it's like, I remember, maybe this isn't accurate, but I feel like we talked about getting married in a church potentially too. But you know how they say about memory, you make shit up eventually. But either way, had that conversation happen, I still have the same opinion regardless, which is it wouldn't have been in alignment for me. But I do remember thinking I would acquiesce to that. And so I sort of think now, I think it's the gift of age, which we all should experience the intolerance that the gift of age has for being outside of alignment with. Like you realize it doesn't fucking matter. Like you realize that making grandma happy by getting married in a church, I'm okay with making grandma not happy. Like if grandma's not happy, that's okay. There's this interesting.
When I was born, was that bestowed upon me? Now you'll keep me happy until I die.
Right. Right. Which shows you, though, that's the same message that is why we relate, why we're in relationship, that this sort of hereditary expectation of who we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to show up. And when you start to authentically self-express, which I would say the invitation is most there in relationship to continue to cultivate that skill, is you'll all of a sudden see that not a lot of people are going to be a big fan of yours if you've been a people pleaser and you've been keeping the peace. All of a sudden you went from keep the peace person to fuck shit up person, like tell the truth, when most human systems, when you think about them, are really structured to protect the truth from coming out or from even acknowledging the truth. We all take on roles in our families to not talk about uncle whatever who touches people, who are like the aunt who's an alcoholic. Like we all have these structures of human system that says, let's not talk about the elephant in the room. So all of our coping strategies are all just ways to turn away from the elephant, which again, if you think about it, just feeds the systems that just numb us from misalignment, when really the path to freedom relationally and health-wise is all be in integrity with who you are.
And I love that, because the like visual I'm getting in my head is, like as you said, if you've been running through your life trying to appease and please everyone else, then there's a good chance, right, that idea of external harmony that you've created some disharmony and a war within yourself. And so the visual that comes to me is like I'm trying to spin a bunch of plates. If you've ever seen those people who spin a bunch of plates, but they're other people's plates. And so that's an exhausting gig to keep up, trying to spin everyone else's plates. And it feels like, because I've been there, right, of the people pleaser, but if I stop that and focus on my own plate, all of those are going to smash. And because I've been spinning them, I'm responsible for them. That's the chaos, right? I can fuck shit up. But at some point, you're going to have to step into harmony with self. And, as you said before, like if there is to be external harmony and two individuals coming together in a relationship, we want that relationship harmony. It requires the two of us to be in harmony individually so that we come together from that place, right?
Yeah, exactly. that space where we are harmonically, yeah, let's go with that, choosing one another, that there is a resonance
Yes.
In each other's choice, like the choice of getting engaged at this point in my life to this person was easy. There's just such resonance for one another. We're very clear on what we both want. We have aligned stories. We didn't always, that's why we broke up previously. And so there was disharmony, and now there is harmony. And so that's why the next choice didn't make sense previously. Breaking up made sense previously. And I think when we can all start to, I feel like relationally, we all are afraid to tell the truth. I miss you. I feel disconnected from you. I feel like I miss you. I feel like I take you for granted, or you take we for granted, or we take each other for granted. There's all these truths that are occurring all the time that if we just brought them to the surface, we are afraid that they will end the relationship. And what we don't see is they are always the thing that deepens the relationship. If they end the relationship, then the container of the relationship cannot hold the truth. But it needs to crack. Like all of our capacities need to crack relationally to hold bigger capacities, to hold greater intimacy, greater depth, greater conversations. We've been talking about this. Like when you're trying to talk to people in your life who've never really had hard conversations before, the connection between you and them has got to stretch. It's got to collectively stretch, because it can't always accommodate the person with the smaller capacity, which is usually what we do. Is like, oh, I'll shrink to meet you. And I'm like, no, fuck that. Like, let's both get big together. Isn't that the deliciousness of life and love?
Yeah, a relationship isn't a thing that we enter into at one point in time and it remains there. It's an ever expanding and ever evolving thing, right? And we have to grow with it. So then what about for in this audience, guys listening, where that they've been or kind of are that person with the smaller capacity, perhaps, they haven't grown up to witness and learn and understand how to share, not just truth in the world, but in their relationship when it comes to their heart and their desires, where there's that element of vulnerability, that might have been shamed, not modeled, whatever. And it can feel fucking terrifying to step towards that.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would say, look, I grew up playing sports. My nickname when I was a kid was Sensitor. So, it was a good thing I was good at sports so that I didn't have to deal with being made fun of all the time. But that was my nickname for my brother, and other people really enjoyed sharing it with me. At the time, I'd laugh, but it really did hurt because I did feel quite sensitive. And, the first thing I'd say to all men, all humans, because anyone could have been taught this, is that you've been lied to. You've been lied to that your emotionality is in any way connected to your masculinity. Like those two things are not even in the same space. It's such a disservice to us, because we see emotion as weakness. But I would say the inability to face emotion is weakness. The inability to hold the capacity for grief is weakness. And I don't mean weakness in a shaming way, but literally you don't have the ability to do it. There's a chink in your armor, and it's not the chink you think it is. It's not the one that because you have emotion, you are vulnerable. It's the inability to be vulnerable and to hold capacity and space for vulnerability with others that makes us have a chink in our armor.
Yeah, and those are the things where
wholeness.
Yeah, and those are the things where connection can happen.
Exactly, and there's that saying that the depth to which you can love another is only at the depth to which you can love yourself. Well, it's true. Like you're never going to let someone deeper into you than you've been. And, I think for men, for people in relationship with men, there needs to be a delicacy at first, because we're not going to get the right words in the right order. It's a practice. It's a skill set. If you've been socialized your whole life to be emotional and to have communication, which is mostly women, not always, but mostly, then you're going to be years ahead of the person who's not been socialized for that, who is across from you. And I think because I certainly experienced this when I first started learning how to communicate about emotion. Well, one, I remember thinking like, why am I so good at communicating anything but my feelings? So I knew it wasn't a skill set issue. So there is something more. It's about our capacity to even explore those feelings and put words to feelings. So a lot of the work is somatic work too, like working with a somatic therapist, learning about our nervous system, because so many men tend to be avoidant. We tend to shut down. We tend to pull away. We tend to hang up. We tend to sabotage. And that's because we're taught to turn internally, to not let the world see our emotional experience, because our partner might not be able to rely on us, depend on us. She might see us as weak. And women have been socialized to see men that way. And so when a man, in Brene Brown's research, she talks about how when a man cries in front of his partner, she actually gets angry at him and doesn't trust him. And so, I was saying at the very beginning, that's why there's a disconnect between like what we're taught to want, what we know we want from a partner, but then when we face it, can we actually hold it too? And so if we've been told by the world to not hold space for an emotional man or a sad man, or a man who's crying, then when we face that, we have no preparation either. So we reject it too. So, for men, it's great to, I would say that having brothers like you and I, and we're part of a men's group, that is some of the most important work we could ever do, because we often want to go to our female partners or our female friends or our moms or whatever it might be.
Yeah, those areas that we have deemed safer to go into feeling and trickier, more daunting stuff, right?
Yeah, and we haven't, in those spaces, we want them to hold it, them to heal it, them to fix it. And we want the people in our lives to be able to do it. Right, exactly. And we want the people to say that our feelings are okay, and your feelings are valid no matter what they are. But we have to learn how to be okay with our own feelings. Like without that, no amount of affirmation from someone outside of you is going to be enough. They might start you down the path like, oh, there's something here. But it will take our own acceptance that we're emotional beings first. If you just accept you're an emotional being, you're going to start to see all sorts of feelings come out. There's that saying that angry is sad's bodyguard. Behind a lot of rage is grief. But if you're not allowed to express grief, then you might experience a lot of anxiety. You might experience depression. You might experience a lot of rage.
Yeah. And, that anger as well can be a quote unquote problem, but often it's the thing that we get some semblance of control and power from as well,
and
right?
Significance. Yeah, exactly. Power, significance. People will listen to you when you're angry. So we know it works. It's socially somewhat acceptable.
Right. It is, but it isn't, but it's more so than the other side of the coin.
Yeah. In sports, you can really exploit it.
Yeah.
But when you actually sit with it and you're able to get what's behind the anger, when I remember when I first sort of tapped into the edge of rage, I just felt grief just wash over me. And, I do a lot of boxing, because boxing for me is a good way to process that kind of stuff, like just hitting a heavy bag and doing workouts that way. Because I think it's still important that we move that energy through our body.
Yeah. And if you haven't done that, we won't turn this into a tutorial, but like at the very least, take away that exploring anger when it's there, and also potentially reflecting on like, where maybe have there been some experiences in my life that if you looked at it as an observer, you might go, there's probably warranted some anger to be fucking pissed off about that, and you haven't processed it, then it's probably worth exploring that, because it might still be sitting in there underneath the surface. And that's what bubbles up at some other point where that didn't warrant that response. Oh, well, that response is maybe connected to something in the past I haven't quite dealt with. So a lot of relevance and importance, I think, to explore that stuff. And then one of the things I want to lean into there was, you spoke about it somewhat in this context. Acknowledge that you're a human and that you have emotions. That's a pretty important one. But then also you spoke about like the power of, for men, not just going, like a lot of men will struggle to even connect and open up to their partners. You would have heard this. I've heard this so many times from women, something around that he's closed off, he's emotionally not there. And maybe one quick point of reference is, as shitty as that might be, what you're getting might be the most he is emotionally open, apart from when he's, slammed 10 beers maybe. But make sure that you're not just going to your partner or, in some sense, the woman in your life to have some connection to your emotions and your breadth of humanity, your humanness, but also ensure that you've got men around you, speaking to the group that we're in and obviously a lot of the work that men in our kind of broad space do. So what, for guys who are like, okay, I've got mates, we talk about women and sport and we, maybe have some drinks and we do the cliche, kind of stuff that men do and we connect. I've got that. But you're talking about something else. What is that? What's the importance? What's the potential there?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes those men's groups won't be like your regular dudes that you hang out with, won't be the spaces that you can do this with. So you always know there's online communities that you can join. There's often local groups that you can join. Mike, you got that stuff going on. And that's an opportunity for people to be guided in this space where they can learn about it. Because that's the hard place to test it, is with the dudes you always talk about sports only with, and any emotion is sort of waved aside. But I will say that the group of guys that I grew up with, we had a friend who committed suicide, and that conversation really, there was a huge conversation about mental health, how people are feeling, like we don't want to miss those types of things. And, it really opened up a huge dialogue. And that's been true of any sort of, the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, all these things have really initiated a lot of dialogue within the men's groups that I'm in and friendships that I have. And so that can be a gateway to having more important conversations. But I'd say that you can't go to the place where the emotion is completely eradicated and expect to find it there. I can't go to spaces of toxic masculinity, as people might call it, and expect to find healthy masculinity, which also I think we need to be mindful of the generalizations we have, because of course some of the most emotional dudes I know are like jacked with tons of steroids and look like they have a tear tattoo instead of real tears. But, I think of a couple of buddies of mine who are like that people would assume don't have a lot of emotional capacity, who are some of the most emotionally adept people I know.
Yeah. And so, it might not be the environment, the group, the place where none of that currently happens or has historically happened, but it could be, right? Hopefully it might not require something as tragic as a suicide to explore that. But maybe it's one of the guys, where it feels a bit safer to connect one-on-one. And then can you speak to us in terms of, okay, so, I've got men around me where we can be real and we can have real conversations. Why do I need that beyond having it with my partner, or just talking shit with my mates?
Well, one, we don't want to always have to turn towards a partnership for all our emotional support. That saying that we expect from a relationship today, we expect what we used to get from a village. And that's very true. That's Esther Perel who said that. And, when you look at the research, when women go through a breakup, they don't lose their emotional support network, because whenever they have a problem or a win in their life, about 70% of the time they turn towards their friends. But with men, about 30% of the time we turn towards our friends. So when we lose our relationships, we often lose where our emotional safety is, our security, the place we feel seen. And
where we can process shit.
Exactly. And this is also why we're more likely to get remarried right away. We're more likely to not take the time between the things, because we don't know how. We're not socialized to do it. And so, we have to decide that being non-emotional has to stop with us, and the reason, as you said, it's so important is, well, then in your men's groups, in your buddies groups, you actually feel like you can be yourself. You can actually feel like you're authentic. You can actually feel like you can kick back and actually be who you really are. I think when you start to wake up to the fact that you've been pretending, then you won't actually want as much to be in those situations. Look, like there are certain friendships in my life that I know are more about talking about sports or talking about, I don't go to them when I'm in some sort of emotional turmoil. But also sometimes I like just doing that. I don't always want to talk about all the things that are going on in my life, you know? So I think it's about balance, but it's also recognizing the immense amount of sort of mutual acceptance that occurs when two people can just, or a group of people can just be who they really are and share how they really feel. There's just like an exhale that can occur in each other's company where you're no longer wearing a mask trying to be around people. You just are who you are. And then you're more present. You feel more safe, more accepted. And it's because you created that environment with other people.
Yeah. And I think, you know, the other thing I'm getting there as well is that it's inviting you to, you know, continue that, right? Like to show up as you. And so it by default, it's kind of inviting you to growth, you know, as we know from experience in some of our conversations. That's where we can be honest, i.e. I can show up as my honest self, but I can be honest with them, share my experiences, and they can be honest with me. For example, hey, I think you're missing something, you know, like, can I give you some feedback on that? And we can actually connect, and it invites me to consider things that I might not have seen or considered, to see blind spots that I can't see. You know, there's 5 guys that are like, Mike, we love you, and we see this, and you're not seeing it, or maybe you're turning a blind eye to it, right? There's that invitation to growth and what is available to me. And I suppose when that comes to my relationship or my potential for a relationship, I take that with me. I take that honesty, that authenticity, that strength that I get. You know, it's like iron sharpens iron, right? It allows me to be more when it comes to the rest of my life, certainly my relationships as well.
Well, I think too, like, you know, some of the best feedback I've ever gotten about how to grow and who to be and my integrity or being out of it were from men in my life, or from men who called me to be greater. You know, it's kind of like the warrior calling the warrior forward. And we need that. We don't just need soft tenderness. Sometimes we need sort of fierce love. And that often comes from the men in our lives who are like, I see this in you and I'm calling you forward, not calling you out. I always love that language change, like call forward. And you think about it, it's like a lot of people will say, well, I don't feel like, or they feel like they can't be themselves in a relationship. Well, if you hold yourself back and hold back who you truly are in the relationship, then you are co-creating a relationship that you're not safe to be yourself in. And so we do this in romantic relationships too. So that's why it's like how you relate in one way will be how you relate in every. You know, if you're okay with the world just seeing who you are, eventually, right? That can be a learned thing, especially when the world told you not to do that. And you start to do that. Well, you won't even want to be in relationships where you can't be who you are anymore because it's too exhausting. Who wants to pretend you like shit you don't like? Whenever anyone's like, do you want to be in a fantasy football league? I'm like, no, how fucking boring. But for a large group of my buddies, they love it. But there's not this thing where I'm pretending and doing it every Saturday, hating what I'm doing just so I could fit in and be part of a group. I could still be part of the group or not. Either way, I'll be happy because I'm not doing it. It's like pretending to fish. I don't like fishing. Do I want to go fish? No, I don't. And I'm not going to pretend. If I had to for survival, I will, but otherwise, no.
Yeah, there's conditions on my fishing, my willingness to fish. And yeah, as you say, the more I fully explore and express myself in the world and in relationships, the more I don't want to over here, where perhaps there's been some agreements in the past, you know, because I'll feel like I need to step into that outfit, that armor, that mask, that performance. Right. And that becomes exhausting, the spinning of the plates, right? It's easier just to not fucking spin everyone else's plates, their ideas of you, right? The expectations and so on. So where I want to go now, we've kind of spoken about this in little dribs and drabs. You've mentioned it a couple of times. And what I'm getting through all of this, where we're leading is to this idea of secure attachment, but perhaps before that, being secure in yourself when you come into and when you are in a relationship. Can you kind of talk us through that? Because my simple understanding so far would be we talk about anxious attachment, right? We want to get towards secure attachment. So there's this place of, well, if what I've been going into all of my relationships, as we said at the start, thinking about the other, it's on them, they're to blame for this, they're not giving me what I need, I can't trust them. Well, the invitation is to look at self.
Mm-hmm.
Who can I be and how can I be? So if I'm looking ahead going, okay, so I want to get to a place of being secure in myself so I can be in a secure relationship, a secure attachment, where do I start? What does that look like?
Well, if you want to learn how to create secure relationships, you have to learn where you're starting, right? You have to get an understanding. We're talking about the idea of attachment theory. And in attachment theory is this theory that we have this attachment system, and it's correlated with how I connect with my early childhood caregivers, i.e. mainly my mom. And so was I securely attached with my mom? That would mean that I trust mom, that when mom leaves, she comes back. It's all based on research originally from a guy named Jonathan Bowlby. And what they did was they observed how the baby interacts with mom. Mom leaves the room, mom comes back, and they saw how the baby experienced that. So mom leaves, mom comes back, baby's like crying, connects with mom, doesn't want to leave mom's side. So afraid that when mom leaves, she doesn't come back. That's anxious attachment. And then mom leaves, mom comes back, baby reunites with mom, goes back to playing, trust mom, secure attachment. Last one, mom leaves, mom comes back.
Yeah, baby leaves, that's it.
Baby's like, bye. Actually, that would be pretty aligned.
Yeah.
Mom comes back, baby acts as if didn't really care that mom was gone. So more nonchalant about it, but physiologically is experiencing the same response as the anxious child. That's avoidant attachment. Avoidant attachment can be separated in two types, dismissive and fearful. Dismissive is more correlated with like high self-confidence. People who are like, when people get too close, they're too needy. I don't like having people have to depend on me. Commitment's big, it's a lot, People who are dismissively attached are more likely to have one-night stands, that type of stuff. Fearful avoidant, they're more, they've experienced pain, trauma, betrayal, maybe something like that. And so they really want a healthy, loving relationship, but they're afraid that when they get too close, they're going to get hurt. Mm-hmm. And so they're avoidance. So you could see that both avoidant and anxious styles are both insecure styles. So you might, an anxious person might over pursue, is more likely to self-abandon, make the other person's needs matter more than their own. And so a secure attachment is defined as my partner's needs matter as much as my own, not more than my own, which would be anxious, not less than my own, which would be more so avoidant. And so really we want to learn, like, how do I create safe and secure relationships? Well, it's a good place. I'm sort of speaking to this in attachment theory, but really it's about like learning, how do you currently relate? Where are your challenges? What do you ultimately want to create? Are you ready to take responsibility for how you relate? How do you handle conflict? Where do you shut down? What are your triggers? Because all of these just cultivate more self-awareness so that when you're in the midst of, conflict or a challenge, but just relationship in general, that you're like observant and aware of how your stuff mixes with their stuff. And that's really what a relationship is like my stuff plus your stuff equals our stuff. And together, the we that we create together is we're going to wound each other, we're going to trigger each other, and we're going to have chosen each other for that specific, beautiful journey of learning how to heal it. So how do you do it? That self-awareness piece, and then beginning to build tools and actually do the work in each of those spaces that you learn about.
Yeah, nice. And there's a pretty important word in there, I think, which is work, right? Mm-hmm. Work. It's exploration, to have self-awareness means you got to pay attention, you got to dig, you got to explore, you got to ask questions, you got to excavate. So we can bring that, into our consciousness. So then last thing I want to explore, which I think, is kind of lending itself to here is, okay, so my relationships and how I connect and how I relate are going to be predicated on what's going on in me. So the connection here is going to be, somewhat relative to the connection out here, as I point outwards, is going to be relative to the connection in here within me. So how do I start to kind of cultivate, or maybe not necessarily start, but like, what does self-connection look like? How do I, deepen that, cultivate that?
Yeah, I love this principle from Pema Chodron talks about it in her book, When Things Fall Apart. And she talks about this principle from Buddhism called Maitri, which is, where most people talk about this idea of like self-love, right? Like, oh, I love myself. I go to the gym, I take bubble baths, I go to the spa, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And sure, those are certainly acts of self-love. But she talks about it more in this idea of becoming best friends with yourself. Like, are you someone that you admire? Do your choices actually indicate that you have care and concern for yourself? So this relationship with self is about, I would say, first discovering, what do you value? Like, what actually matters to you? What are your top 3 to 5 values in your life? And so a lot of people will say, I don't know. I've never really taken the time to do that. Well, if you look at your choices in your life, you'll be able to see what your current values are, and you might not like them. But if you actually just explore and you think, who is someone I admire? Well, whoever you admire is someone who has values that you hope to exude. And so you can pretty much assume that your values are very similar to theirs. The way they go about the world, how they treat people, things like that. And I would say separate that from values in work, because that might be confusing. If you're like, you value someone who's all about hustle, 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 and all those things. You might not value hustle, but you might value hard work. And so you start to look at people who you really, really value, though. And then you write down, okay, well, here's my top 3 values. So let's say your top 3 values are wellness. So like health, physical, mental, emotional health. Integrity, being in alignment with who I say I want to be, having a moral code. Maybe a third one is fun, joy, bringing light to the world, or just doing everything with joy. And really, I'm speaking about some of mine. So what you then would do is, but I think those are all pretty common for people. And then you would do an inventory of your life. Okay, well, these are the values I know I intrinsically have. They're part of the core of who I am. Then what in my life is in alignment with those values and what is not? And what behaviors do I have that are not in alignment with those values? And then if we're really being simple, stop doing all the things that aren't in alignment with your values. You'd write, how would I get into integrity in this relationship, in this behavior, in this choice? And you start to clean up your life. And this is not a dissimilar process than the 12 steps, which is really like, I think it's at step 4 or 5 that you like write down all the people you've hurt. And then I think it's step 5 or 6. It's the one after that where you then go and repair and apologize for the impact you've had. And this is a similar process where you're like actually going to go and get back into integrity with how you've interacted with the world and yourself.
Yeah, and in doing so, that builds clearly that self-awareness, right? Because you're learning a lot more about yourself, but you're truly connected into who you are and what you want and how you have been showing up in the world and how you want to, right? And then taking the actions to course correct where applicable.
Well, and if you get to know that part of you and you get to integrity with that space, like that totality of what I just talked about, and you learn boundaries to protect your values, that's why you need to know boundaries, then relationships will actually come much easier for you because there's nothing you're trying to hide. Like you just are who you are. And if you're in alignment with your values, you're free. It's really liberation. And if someone comes into my life and I'm dating and I'm clear on what I want and I'm clear on what my values are, if they're not in alignment with them, I won't even fuck around because these principles are so important to me and staying centered in myself is so important to me that I won't even bother to deal with them. I won't even question whether I keep someone unavailable in my life if I'm available. If that's like a corner as being present to who I am and they can't be present to who I am, then they're not a mirror to what I actually want. If I can't be present to who I am, gosh, I'm going to love people who aren't present to who I am. They're going to validate my whole story.
Yeah. And, that's circling back to one of the points earlier around abandoning self, right? Like I might know my values, but if I haven't set those boundaries around them yet, then it's easier for me to step across them and abandon, right? So learning how and when and with whom and in what way, perhaps in what intensity to uphold those, right? And honor them. And that might be a practice as well. If it's pretty new, then, go gently with that part of yourself, but build the muscle in a simple sense, right?
Exactly.
Brother, thank you so much for coming on the show again. Huge gratitude for this. Thanks and for you and the work you do in the world. Everyone knows where you are, and if they don't, bloody go and find him. Jesus. But is there anything that you've got coming up at the moment that you'd like to share with us?
I have the app Mind that we've launched.
Yeah, please tell us.
Yeah, you can
60-second pitch. Go.
Yeah, right. The elevator pitch. Well, it's basically like if Peloton made love to masterclass. That's essentially what it is. It's got live and on-demand classes on all things relational, emotional. You can learn tons of stuff, and you can just go to download Mind, MINED.com. Downloadmind.com.
Make sure we put it in the notes and everything. Yeah, absolutely. And I think I love this. I'm a subscriber. I'm an investor. I believe in this, in many levels. And one simple one for me, which I think is perhaps becoming more relevant as each day goes by, and maybe this is some of the engine behind it, is certain things that we use these days, like certain social media avenues, can become a bit of a vortex. Yeah, and absolutely. The beauty of something like Mind is that you're going there for quality curated content that is coming from these wonderful people like yourself, and there's none of the fluff and vortex sucking stuff that kind of keeps us in that very distracted, numbing monkey brain kind of place. Beautiful. So yeah, thank you for that, brother. We'll get that in the notes and everything. Legend, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for having me. If anyone wants to check me out, though, you can go to Create the Love on Instagram or createthelove.com. If they're, courses on breakups, dating, rediscovering yourself. So lots of stuff.
Beautiful.
Thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks for coming, brother. You've been listening to the Everyday Legends podcast, the show dedicated to helping everyday men build legendary relationships with yourself, with your partners, and in your world. If you have got something from this podcast, please share it with someone that you think could benefit from it. And please visit your home for podcasts. Like us, subscribe to us, leave us a review. Your feedback is phenomenal in getting this in front of more eyes and ears. Until next time, I'm Mike Campbell, and remember to build that legendary integrity.